Okay. So in the story that we're up to, we're thinking about the story of Abraham after Sarah passes away. And we spent a few weeks discussing the beginning of chapter 23, which is a chapter that discusses Abraham's purchase of the cave of Machpelah, which is in Hebron, to bury his wife Sarah. And we discussed the negotiations and the ramifications, and we spent some time on that. Toward the end of the chapter, which we did not read yet, we discussed the finalizing of the purchase and ultimately how Abraham, in verse 19, Abraham buries Sarah, his wife, and that place becomes a burial estate for Abraham and his family, and it's there, and it's of course we know where it is, and people visit it up till this very day. I've been there a few times. So that is the end of the story of chapter 23. Chapter 24, we go from burial to marriage, because you get the first full cycle of life. And Abraham is elderly. The Torah describes Abraham as being elderly, and he wants to find a wife for his son Isaac. The problem is that he doesn't want Isaac to leave the land of Israel, which then was called the land of Canaan, because it was holy. On the other hand, he doesn't want Isaac to marry any of the local girls, because it doesn't say why, but we assume that they were not for his standard. We'll see, we'll talk about what that means. But therefore he calls his servant Eliezer, and he makes him take an oath that he won't take Isaac Isaac won't leave the land of Israel, but he will go, the servant Eliezer will go and find a wife from Abraham's birthplace, which is Haran, which Abraham left many years prior. And that's where the story plays out. And the Torah in chapter 24 discusses at great length the tales of Eliezer, the stories of Eliezer, and how eventually he went and he found Rebecca. What's interesting about the story is it's one of the few places in the story in the Torah that the story, it's a long story, 66 verses, the narrative is repeated. In other words, it tells us everything that happened, and then it tells us how Eliezer repeats everything that happened to the prospective in-laws, to the parents of Rebecca. So right away, this caused the rabbis to ask and say, why is the story of Eliezer written twice in the Torah? Seemingly, the Torah, we see the pattern of the Torah is very careful with mentioning extra words. Certainly when it comes to the matters of law. When it comes to the law, there are a lot of laws that we derive from one extra letter or word, certainly from an extra word. And here you have many, many, many words that are repeated. The whole narrative is repeated at least once. So that is the question that the sages ask. What is the answer the sages give? It's one of those answers, which is a nice answer, but it doesn't really describe anything. What the sages say, and Rashi quotes it, the sages say, you ready for the answer? The stories of the servants of the patriarchs are yafa, more beautiful than the Torah of the children. We are the children. We are the descendants of the patriarchs. And yet our Torah, when God wants to convey information and law in the Torah, he only speaks sometimes only with allusions. Certainly does not say anything twice. When it comes to the children, the stories of the servants of the patriarchs, that is double. Why? Because again, the stories of the servants of the patriarchs are more beautiful. It's a wonderful answer, except that it didn't explain why. It's a description. It says it's more beautiful. It doesn't explain why. So here there's a lot. Everybody says something else. In other words, you can say what you want. In other words, there's more clarification necessary.
The children and the servants.
We're the children.
The servant story.
The servant story is more beautiful than the Torah of the children. We're the children of the patriarchs. Our Torah, many laws are just written with just an allusion, with one word, one letter. And yet when it comes to the stories of the patriarchs, the Torah repeats the story at least twice. Some parts are even 3 times. So the question becomes why? So the sages say, what do you mean? What do we derive from here? We derive that the stories of the servants are more
Because
beautiful.
they're the actual living of the event.
And what are we?
What?
And what are we?
Well, we live after the Torah, and we follow our own interpretation, but those are the actual.
Right. But what's more important, stories or Torah? So I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I'm just trying to say.
So to me, the stories are.
Oh, so Seth says, I need you to elaborate. Seth says the stories are more important. You're right. Why are the stories more important to you?
Because when you're doing something in actual life, there's circumstances that you have to take into consideration. Whereas if you're interpreting a law, you're not in that real event and you don't understand the energies and the
Right.
feelings and stuff that's really going on that you have to consider as
Yeah.
a servant.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to say what you said, but you give me a little bit of poetic license to change it a little bit.
Yeah, you should.
Okay.
I don't.
Seth says something very true. As the sages said, the stories of the children of the servants of the patriarchs are more beautiful than the Torah of the children. But how come? Isn't Torah the most holy thing in Judaism? So there are various interpretations, but I'm going to start with the one that Seth says. And Seth says you could learn much more from the stories. Why? Torah is abstract. This is the law. This is how you're supposed to live. Okay, it's wonderful. It's theoretical in some sense. This is the ideology, but it's actually more beautiful to see how the ideology has actually been played out in real life. In some sense, that's the greater lesson. You could learn more from somebody who's a human being and not necessarily the patriarchs, it's just a servant to the patriarchs. We'll see later the person has their own ego and their own agenda, which could be the opposite of Abraham's agenda. We'll talk about that. So this person is not struggle free. And nevertheless, the stories of how the values of Abraham influence this person, in some sense, is more inspiring than the Torah, because the Torah is what we should become, or what we aspire to. But the patriarchs is the servants of the patriarchs is how they actually lived these values in the real world. So in some sense, that's more beautiful. Okay.
There's no substitute for experience.
There's no substitute for experience. The sages say, Ein Chacham, there's no wisdom like experience. But that's one's own experience.
That's why being old.
That's the advantage of being old. Experience, human life experience is something that you can't read about in the book, because even though you read it, but until you experience it, you don't really appreciate it. But that is for oneself. But even to watch somebody, if you watch somebody who's giving a lecture about theoretical, how we think that life should be, or learning from even the servants of the patriarchs, who are not on the level of the patriarchs, maybe not on the level of the children. We'll see in a minute that Eliezer, Abraham does not want to marry Eliezer's family, right? So it wasn't like they had their own, in other words, it wasn't like they were the most righteous people. But nevertheless, the fact that they lived in Abraham's house, you see how Abraham's values are implemented in their real life. And that's in some sense more inspiring, because it's not in the realm of ideology or philosophy, but it actually comes in the real world experience, and you can learn from them. And that's why, in some sense, the sages say, one of the reasons, perhaps, one of the interpretations of why what the sages say, that the stories of the servants, the patriarchs, are greater than even the Torah of the children.
I have one question.
Yes. No, please.
I wonder if Abraham was influenced also by Eliezer. I don't know, but I think everybody influences everybody.
Yeah, there's every dynamic. There's a two-way. There's the giver, there's the recipient, but almost always the person who appears to be the giver, in some sense, is the recipient, and vice versa. in any relationship. The sages say as follows: more than the calf wants to nurse the cow, the mother wants to give. So you look at that dynamic: who's the giver, who's the recipient? Say, well, the calf is the recipient, or the calf is allowing the mother to give. Have teacher students, who's giving who? On the surface, the teacher is giving the students, but the sages say you learn more from your student than you learn from your teacher or from your colleague. Who's the giver? Who's the recipient? The sages say more than the homeowner gives the poor, the mitzvah of charity, homeowner gives the poor charity, but the poor is actually giving the homeowner an opportunity to do a mitzvah, right? So in any dynamic of giver and recipient, who is the giver, who's the recipient? It's usually multi-layered. So there's obviously Eliezer receives from Abraham, but in some sense, maybe Abraham learns from Eliezer how his values are played out in the real world with somebody who is not on that spiritual level. So that could be, there's something to that, absolutely. Okay, it's a long story. It's 67 verses. I would read them all, except that my throat is hurt, my voice is gone. But let's talk about the general story before we get into the details. What's the general story? The general story is Abraham calls Eliezer and he says, take an oath that you're going to find a wife for my son Eliezer, for my son Isaac, from my birthplace. So Eliezer, he doesn't give him any criteria. He says, you'll go, verse 4, on page, okay, if you have the art scroll, it's page 111. I'll share the screen. We're talking about chapter 24 of Genesis, at verse 4. We'll go back to a second. We'll go to we'll read a few verses. Verse 2, and Abraham said to his servant, the elder of his house, who ruled over all that was his, please place your hand under my thigh, which was for an oath. And he says, and you will adjure, and I will adjure you by the Lord, the God of the heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose midst I dwell, but you shall go to my land and go to my birthplace, and you shall take a wife for my son, for Isaac. What's the criteria? What do we need? What about the girl? Does she have to have good? Does she have to believe in God? Does she have to be a kind person? Does she have to be good looking? Nothing, no criteria. The only criteria we see is verse 4, my land and my birthplace. So the conversation continues. Maybe she won't want to come back. Abraham says, no, you don't take my son back. Okay. He takes the oath. He goes to Abraham's birthplace, Haran, which is now on the border. I think it's in modern day Turkey, close to Iraq. And basically, you're Eliezer. What do you do? So he makes a promise. He prays to God. He says, God, please make me successful. How am I going to know what to do? So he makes a sign. He says, I'm going to ask one of the girls for water. The one who gives me water, and not only gives me water, but also gives to my camels. He came with 10 camels. That's the one I know that you chose for Rebecca, for Isaac. And that's what happens. What happens is he sees Rivka. He doesn't know who she is. He asks her. He asks her for water. She gives him water. He then goes and she gives to his camels. He's so impressed, he gives her jewelry because he's so confident this is the one. Then he asks what are Abraham's relatives. She wanted the exact thing. It's Isaac's cousin's daughter. So now he's sure that this is God's hand. And he tells Rebecca, who is servant of Abraham, she takes him to home. Eliezer, the family wants to feed him. He doesn't want to eat. He wants to first succeed in his mission. So he repeats the entire story of everything that happened. When they hear what happened, they say, oh, this must be from God. And they consent to the marriage. Then Eliezer says, I'm in a rush. Let's go back, which was unusual in those days. Those days you had to give the girl at least a year to get ready, especially she's leaving and she won't be coming home. She's basically migrating to Israel from Turkey. So they don't want to let her go. They say, let's call the girl. She says she wants to go. And they go back to the land of Canaan. And the Torah ends where they meet up with Isaac and they get married. And a beautiful verse in the Torah, he loved her. Doesn't say that about Adam and Eve. Doesn't say that about Abraham and Sarah. This is the first time it says it, so that's interesting. And that's the end of the story. So there's many ways to get into the story, but we'll start from one place. The sages say that the story of the servant was repeated in the Torah, right? And it was. But once you start looking carefully, okay, I don't know. Let's go before that. Was Eliezer's prayer to God, was it legitimate? Was it a good? Was it allowed? Was it kosher? So on the surface, why not? Why not? On the surface, okay. On the surface, why not? Why isn't it kosher? So there is a commandment in the Torah that says, don't make a sign. Don't make a sign and say, if this thing happens to me, that's a good sign. I'm going to do A. If something else happens to me, that's a bad sign. I'll do B. For example, I'm walking down the street and if I see a deer running by me, that's a bad sign. I'm not going to start my journey. It's something you're not allowed to do. Maimonides, when he quotes that law, and he brings an example of something you're not allowed to do, he quotes Eliezer, the servant of Abraham. If I ask her for water and she gives me water, then I know she's the right girl. Maybe she's not. Ask her friends, do some research, go on a few dates, check out her social media. You just make a sign. If I ask her for water and she gives me water, then I know she's the one. So Maimonides seemingly attacks Eliezer. All the commentators in Maimonides get all bent out of shape. Eliezer is Abraham's servant. We presume what he did was right. God answered his prayer. Stories in the Torah. How could Maimonides say this is so negative? So this is something we have to address because that's a window into what's really happening here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Maimonides. I'm going to quote it. I'm going to read it to you. So you'll see what's happening here, and you'll see the great drama between Maimonides and the commentators on Maimonides. So here we go. And again, this is all a way to get into the story.
How old was Eliezer?
I don't think it says the exact age. Maybe it gives us some description here. Let's see.
I don't think it says.
It says Abraham said to his servant, the elder of his household. The problem is that in biblical Hebrew, older could be synonymous with wise. It can also be synonymous with leadership. But the word is the elder of his house. So we presume he's elderly, distinguished. Okay, so I'm reading Maimonides a little bit. It is forbidden to practice soothsaying. In Hebrew, it's linachesh, is like to guess. Soothsaying, I don't know what that means, but okay. As idolaters do. As Leviticus 19:26 states, do not act as soothsayer. What does that mean? What is meant by a soothsayer? For example, those who say, since my piece of bread fell out of my mouth, or my staff fell from my hand, I will not travel to this place today. Since if I were go, I would not be able to accomplish my desires. I'm eating breakfast, my loaf of bread fell onto the floor, bad day, I'm not going to travel because it's a bad sign. Since a fox passed on my right side, I will not go out of my door today. Since if I were to go, I would meet a deceiver. Fox was a symbol of somebody who was clever, cunning. So if a fox walks by me, I'm not going to business today. I'm not going to work because I'm going to meet someone who's going to deceive me. Similarly, this category includes those who hear the chirping of a bird and say, this will happen or this will not happen. It is beneficial to this or it is detrimental to do that. Also, it includes those who say, slaughter this rooster that crow like a raven, slaughter this hen that crow like a rooster. Similarly, here's what we need to get. A person who sets up omens for himself. For example, if this and this happens, I will do this. And if it will not happen, I will not do it. And here comes the key words. As Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, did, and things of this like, all this is forbidden. Anyone who does one of those things because of such omens is liable for lashes. So this is a very interesting technical point. In the Torah, there's many violations you can violate. But to get a punishment, it has to be an action. So making the omen itself is the violation. But to be punished, you have to take an action based on the omen. So Maimonides basically says, Maimonides is consistent with Maimonides. He doesn't believe in any of this supernatural stuff, or what's the word I'm looking for? He's not. What's the word I'm looking for? Help me out, please. The word is superstition. He doesn't believe in superstition, and he says superstition is idol worship because you say these random things have power over you. So he's very anti-superstition. Maimonides. Other people disagree with him, but Maimonides is totally anti-superstition. By the way, next year I'm just plugging JLI next spring. They're going to do a JLI about all ideas of superstition within Judaism. But Maimonides is always, and every issue comes out against it. And this is a case in point. But what's happening here is Maimonides now names a name. He says, like Eliezer, son of Abraham, Eliezer, servant of Abraham, and he says that's forbidden. And you can imagine that this causes a storm. Go ahead.
Why would you think that? I mean, it wasn't necessarily a superstition.
Oh.
He made his judgment call, supposedly because he was an elder, he had the info and the knowledge and the wisdom. Maybe it wasn't. It could have been.
So Seth makes a very good point, and that's exactly what the commentators of Maimonides defend Eliezer and question Maimonides. No, we're defending him. What's the problem? What's the difference between what Eliezer did and superstition? Superstition is not logical. What Eliezer did is actually very logical. Why? He's looking for a kind girl. That's the character he's looking for. So when he says, if I ask someone for water and she will give me water, and that will prove that she's the one for Isaac, subtext, that will prove that she's kind, and therefore I want her for Isaac because she fits right into Abraham's family, which Abraham's family is all into kindness. So that's not superstition. That's logic. Yes, if you want a kind person, ask them for water. And if they give you water and they give to your camels, which is even more than you asked for, then you know she's kind.
And the opposite is true.
The opposite is true. If she didn't, well, then you know she's normal. She's average. If she would say, I'll give you water, and she wouldn't offer to give to the camels. That's okay. Nobody feeding 10 camels water is going way beyond the call of duty. So she's a normal girl, fine. A lot of them in the marketplace. She's not, there's no proof that she's for Isaac. But to set up a test, a very difficult test, give a stranger water. You're in the Middle East, by the way. Water is a very valuable thing. You don't just give it to a stranger. Certainly to give 10 to an outsider, certainly to feed 10 camels, right? So this is a very big requirement, very big test, a very difficult test. If she passes the test, We know she's for Abraham. Beautiful. What she's for Abraham's family, she's for Isaac. So the defenders of Eliezer question Maimonides and say, how could you say that that's a sin?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I can't. I'm sorry. Tell me.
You're doing very good. But the problem, not the problem. The problem for me is that you're one step ahead of me. Whatever I want.
No.
Go ahead.
Did he interview other girls
No.
before?
No. One girl. Why he asked her is another story. But one girl. He sees the girl, walks up to her. He says, now she's not the only one coming. It says in the evening, all the girls go to draw water at the well. There's no running water. You're in the Middle East. The most valuable thing you need is water. So every evening, the girls went to get water. One more point. If you come to town and you want to meet people, where do you go today if you want to meet people? Today you go to a dating app. Used to be, you go to the bar. Today you go to the restaurant. So when I teach this to children, I always ask them, in the ancient world, where did people meet up? At the well, of course. Right? If there's no running water, everyone has to go to the well. Center of town was the well.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
The water belongs to whom?
That's a good question. Doesn't say. We assume it belongs to the town.
Okay, so she is not actually providing something of hers. She is providing of something of Commonwealth.
Let's assume that's correct. She's providing free labor.
Labor of just getting water out of the well.
10 camels. I don't have any camels, but I was told that after traveling, what is it? Is it 1,000 kilometers? Maybe a little bit less. Probably about 1,000 kilometers. They need water. So the idea is that she does a lot of work. She does a lot of labor. Now you're raising another question, which is who owns the water, and people discuss it. Yeah. Tell me where you want to go with this. But yes, this is a discussion.
Okay, you just answered my question. It's a labor, and labor, it belongs to her.
Yes.
So she provides out of her goodness of her heart. Okay.
Yes. Now, other people want to continue drilling down your line of questioning. And they say, it's not just labor. It's not just, they say like this, again, it's speculation because we don't know. I didn't live in a town for almost 4,000 years ago in the Middle East. But there is a notion of giving water to someone of the town and giving water to somebody, a stranger. And it's more likely that you would perform the kindness to a local person. And to a stranger, it takes much more, even if it's legally belongs to everybody, but it takes much more, what's the word, courage, because people are suspicious of the outsider. And therefore, to exert all that effort for an outsider, some people say that's actually part of what he was looking for.
Because the town people could criticize her.
The town people can criticize her and say, yes, it legally belongs to everybody, but why are you giving this precious resource to somebody else? Now, you're saying maybe she doesn't have the legal ownership. But I would assume that she has that you have the legal ownership, but
and what about hospitality? Stranger is after 1,000 miles of trip.
So she doesn't have her own home. She does not invite him. She does not invite him to her house. But as soon as this guy gives her the jewelry and he says, I am the servant of your relative, then she says, oh, of course, come to my house. We got plenty of room for you. So yeah, the first thing she didn't take care of the lodging. That's not the most pressing need. The most pressing need was the water. It is interesting because on one hand, you could have said he could have just waited for someone to approach him. He didn't. He approached a girl and asked for water, right? You would say it's actually a bigger thing if she would approach him, but she didn't. Why he set it up that way, I don't know. But what he was looking for, his request of her was relatively minimal. Could you get me some water? And she gives him water. That's just drawing the picture once. That's not, everybody had a cut. Let me finish the point. Then on her own initiative, she says, I'm also going to give you to your camels. That's a big deal. that she was not required to do. She could have checked her kindness box. She could have said, I'm very kind. A guy asked me for water. I gave him water. That's fine. But she goes way beyond that. I just want to say one more point before Seth mentions his point. I would imagine that some people would say, why can't this guy go get his water himself? So it could be this speculation. I don't know this, but the speculation is that the custom was that you're an outsider. You don't take water unless you're invited by someone in the town. Yes, it belongs to everybody, but you need an invitation, right? It's like you come to town, you say, could I go? God forbid, a stranger wants to go to Todd's Point in Greenwich. So you say, well, I know someone in the town, could I come? So now they went to court that you can buy, anyone could buy a beach pass. Wonderful. But you see the point, it belongs to everybody. It's like a country club. If you know someone at the country club, you can come. Anybody can invite. So he can't go get water. So when he says to somebody, can you give me water? What he's also saying is, could you give me an invitation to take the water? Right? And then you have some tension. So I was never at a country club. Or you come to the country, who invited this guy? He's an outsider, right? So you're paying, there's some social price to pay and say, yes, come, I'm giving you water. You have the legal right to, everybody can. Anyone, you're a tax-paying member of the society, you're allowed to invite a guest, but you have to invite the guest. And again, I'm not saying this is a big deal. I think the bigger deal is the labor, feeding 10 camels. It takes a lot of time. She's in a rush. She has to go home, bring water for her family, right? She's certainly going to take her an hour to fill up water for 10 camels. So I think that's what's happening here. So we still have like this. We have Maimonides who said what Eliezer did was wrong. We have the commentators of Maimonides following Seth who say, what do you mean? We're going to defend Eliezer. What Eliezer did was not superstition. What Eliezer did was very logical. So that's a beautiful defense for Eliezer. The problem is now, so what did Maimonides say? So we have to defend Maimonides too. And that's what I'm getting at, because once we realize that, look, it's going to open up another whole window into what's really happening here. But in the meantime, go ahead. Vicky and then Seth, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to interrupt your stream of thought, but I had a question about the selection process. How did Eliezer selected that particular girl? How did Abraham selected the Eliezer, the servant? So that's a kind of separate question, right? So is it discussed anywhere? So first defend Maimonides first, and then maybe we'll go there.
I don't know the answer to your question. Eliezer has a long history with Abraham, because we know already by the covenant of the parts, when God promises Abraham the land of Israel decades earlier, Abraham says, what does it help me to give me a promise for the land if I don't have any children and my heir is going to be Eliezer from Damascus? So Eliezer has a long time with Abraham. So he works for him for a long time. So obviously, Abraham appreciates it. Other girls, I don't know. There are Medrashim. The Medrash says, I'll be honest. I haven't seen the Medrash firsthand, but I see it in the children's books. The Medrash says that Eliezer sees that she's performing kindness on the way to the well. Someone falls down, she picks him up, whatever the Medrash says. So therefore he says, oh, this is a good investment. I can ask any girl. Let me ask this girl. Maybe she was beautiful. Maybe he liked her. I don't know. Doesn't say. That's the point. The point is, doesn't say. So in some sense, there is some randomness here. And he does ask God. If you look at his prayer, he tells God, if you want to look at the verse, again, to really get this, we want to really read all the verses, but it's going to take too much time. Prayer in the art scroll is on page 111. I'm sorry. Yes. And look at verse 12 of 100, chapter 24, verse 12, page 111. I'm going to share the screen right now, God willing. Genesis here. Vayomar. So let's read 11 first. And he made his camels kneel outside the city beside the well of water at eventide, at the time the maidens go out to draw water. In other words, he comes to the city. Verse 12, and he said, Eliezer prays to God, and he says, "O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please cause it to happen to me today and perform loving kindness with my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing at the water by the water fountain, and the daughters of the people in the city are coming out to draw water. And it will be that the maiden to whom I will say, lower your pitcher and I will drink. And she will say, drink, and I will also water your camels. Her have you designated to your servant for Isaac, and through her may I know that you have performed loving kindness with my master." Now we had not yet finished speaking, and behold, Rebekah came out, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, and her pitcher was on the shoulder. So why did he pick this girl? I don't know. Maybe as soon as he finished praying, that's the first girl he saw, right? Look at verse 12. Now he had not yet finished speaking, and behold, Rebekah came out. I'm sorry, verse 15, right? Page 111, on page 113, verse 15. So, or on the screen over here, right? So it's possible, it says he had not yet finished speaking, and Rebekah emerges. Rebekah came out. So it's possible that there was literally the first girl. He's praying to God. He opens his eyes. First one he saw, he asked her. That's possible. But what I was going to say is, if you go back earlier and you go to verse 12, and he says, Lord, he said, "O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please cause to happen." Cause to happen is a nice translation. But the Hebrew, I'm saying, when I say nice translation, I mean it's interpretation. The Hebrew is hakre. What does hakre mean? The word is mikre, chance, right? So he is rolling the dice. He's saying, God, make it happen that the first one I ask is going to be the one I need. So in other words, you see what he's saying? He says, hakre, make it happen. Chance it that I perform loving kindness and I'm going to ask a girl, and that should be the girl. So you see what I'm saying? This verse, when I read verse 12, it seems to me that he's not choosing any girl based on any criteria. In other words, to who to administer the test to, right? So he says, I'm just going to ask anybody, God, help me get to the right one. So maybe
he actually knew exactly, if you look at the prayer, he outlined exactly the characteristics.
yes,
He knew exactly what he wanted.
right.
So you could say it wasn't a prayer. He was just going over in his mind.
Yeah.
This is exactly.
So why does it need God's help? So maybe he's saying, God, I have a beautiful test, but it's like you want to hire someone. So you have your interview that you're going to ask. But by the time you get the right candidate to fill up a test, you have to filter out 50. So basically he's saying, go ahead.
You know, when you said about how he asked her, would you give me water?
Yeah.
Some people would just say like, oh,
Right.
keep away from me.
Right.
So
You're a
he knew
stranger.
right away.
Yeah.
If she did it, he wouldn't even waste time. He would just move on to the next
Right,
one.
right, right.
So he knew I don't know who's right on that. Maimonides or Eliezer, but he knew exactly what to do.
He knew what he's looking for. All I'm saying is, why did he ask this girl? The way I read it, there's two possibilities. Either the first one he saw after he finished praying. That's what verse 15 indicates. And also verse 12 also indicates that by saying, God, chance it, send me the right one. Okay, but we're going back to Maimonides. God did. We're going back to Maimonides. Maimonides says, if you do what Eliezer did, you are a soothsayer. I'm sorry, what did he call it? He called something, soothsayer, he may have said something else. He makes signs for himself. Person who sets up omens for himself. Okay, he says this happens, is good sign, that happens, a bad sign. You can't do it like Eliezer, the son of Abraham. Okay, so now we understand, we defended Eliezer, son of Abraham, and we said, Maimonides, I'm sorry. What Eliezer did is nothing wrong, because what Eliezer did was actually very logical. He was looking for kindness, and he set up a test, and we'll find the kindness. Nothing wrong with that.
Maybe Maimonides is not trying to prove him wrong. Maybe he's just trying to show a lesson.
Yes. What is the lesson? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you an interpretation that I think is absolutely beautiful. I think it's my own, but I'm not sure. In other words, some of the commentaries start leading to this, but to make the full thing, I think it's my own, but I may be
We're gonna
wrong.
make it yours.
Okay, Seth says it will be mine. But for that, we have to take a step back. I think we have enough time to do it by 10:30. Let's take a step back. The sages say, and it's true, that the story is repeated in the Torah twice. In other words, we hear the sign that Eliezer did, and then we see how it happened. I'm sorry, Eliezer tells God, this is what I'm going to do. We read how it happened. Then we read how he goes to her family and he repeats the same story. Okay. And the sages, as I mentioned in the beginning, the sages say, why was it repeated twice? The answer is because there are a lot of lessons to be learned from the servants of Abraham. We have to elaborate. We'll get back to that next week, what we learned from that. We'll get back to that next week. Problem is, on deeper scrutiny, you start seeing that it only appears that Eliezer is repeating the story. In reality, Eliezer is making so many changes that once you start scrutinizing, it's a completely different story. On every subtle point, he says the opposite of what happened. So yes, the main story is true. I asked her for water, she gives me water. It turns out she's my cousin. She's the cousin of my master, and she's kind. That's true. Once you get a little bit deeper, almost everything, he says the opposite of what happens. You ready for the journey? We'll take 5 minutes, try to show the point, and then we'll see what's really happening here. So to do this, we have to put our finger on two places. We'll see what happened and what Eliezer said happened. Okay? So we'll try to do it with all the books and with all the screens. We'll try our best. Okay, before we do that, okay, so we're starting the journey. First place we want to look at is verse 14. And again, some of these are subtle, but you'll see that it's consistent how he's making changes. Let's start with verse 14. So if you have the Art Scrolls, page 111, verse 14. Says Eliezer to himself, to God, and it will be that the maiden to whom I will say, lower your pitcher and I will drink. And she will say, okay, we're highlighting this. This is what she has to say. Let's see if she actually said it. She will say, drink, and I will also water your camels. Don't forget this, okay? This is the quote. Drink, and I will also water your camels. Now, did this happen? So you think it happened because I told you the end of the story that it happened. It didn't happen. She didn't say that. There's no quote like this. She does a little bit different. You tell me better or worse, but she does different. So let's scroll down to where it actually happens and look at verse 17, 18, 19. You're going to think it's trivial, but you'll see it's not. Verse 17. And the servant ran toward her and he said, please let me sip a little water from your pitcher. And she said, you ready for the quote? What does the quote have to be? Yes, and I will also feed your camels. She doesn't say that. She says, drink, my Lord, end quote. She doesn't mention camels. And she hastened and lowered her pitcher on her hand, and she gave him to drink. Okay? The fire truck is in competition.
Superstition.
That is not a sign that I should stop learning. It's not a sign to stop learning. I'm continuing. Okay. Now, the Torah goes on to say, and she finished giving him to drink. Doesn't mean giving him to drink. Lahashka says she finished watering him. In other words, he finished drinking. Think of it as she's literally pouring the jug in his mouth. And she said, I will also draw for your camels until they have finished drinking. Okay, did she do exactly what Eliezer said, yes or no? What in your estimation? Well, I'll tell you, I think no. Right? Verse 14, drink and I will also water your camels. What does she say? She gives him to drink. When he's finished, she says, oh, by the way, I'll give water to your camels. She does not do the same thing. You're going to say it's trivial, right? But it's not. Let's continue down the journey and let's see what happens when he repeats it to her family. And you'll see he doesn't say the truth. Look at verse 44. at the end of the story where she repeats. Verse 44. I'm sorry, verse, no, not verse 44. Verse 46, this is amazing. And she hastened and lowered her pitcher from upon her. And she said, drink and I will also water your camels. Remember, that's what Eliezer said. Eliezer said, I need to quote, drink and I will also water your camels. So in reality, this is Eliezer's plan. This is what he reports to her family, but that's not what she did. Instead, she said, drink. When she finished drinking, he said, oh, by the way, I'm going to also water your camels. That's a change. It looks trivial, but it's not. Now, for the sake of the argument, please accept with me, please agree with me that she changed. Let's assume she changed. Is it better or worse what she did?
I think it's better because
Well,
she gave him to drink first, to his complete satisfaction, and then only then she offered to the camels, and they also drank whatever they needed.
why can't I say, I'll give you and your camels. What's wrong with that? And then give him first. In other words, it sounds like to me that Eliezer is saying it took her time to think of the camels. Sounds like to me that if Eliezer said, she puts her on the spot, give me water. And immediately she says, I'm giving you water and I'm also giving you camels, right? It's more, she has less time to think. And yes, how generous she is. Sounds like it's a downgrade. I'm just being devil's advocate. It's not a downgrade, it's an upgrade. What's the upgrade? So some commentaries say, you don't want to put the human and the camel together. I'm going to feed you and your car. I'm going to feed you and your camel. No, I'm going to feed you. You're prominent. When you're done, I'll worry about the camels. So it's like almost like it's more honor. You come to me and you say, I ran out of gas. Could you give me water? Yeah, I'll give you water and give you gas. No, I'll give you water. Once we take care of you, we'll worry about the car. Right? So that's one interpretation. That it's better.
Isn't there a mitzvah to feed your animals before yourself?
There's a mitzvah to feed your animals before yourself. There is. That's you're the owner. You're the owner, you have a pet, you have to feed your animal. If I see an animal in need and a human being in need, that's a good question, but that's a good question if that will apply to someone else. That's a good question.
It says here, the man was astonished.
Yeah.
At, the man was astonished at her, reflecting silently to know whether Hashem made his journey successful
Yes.
or not. Maybe he thought he wanted it to be successful.
Yes.
And this was the one, and he wanted to do it
Yeah,
quickly
yeah,
and make Abraham.
So let me address that, but I want to finish. I want to make the full point because I only have a few minutes left. I have to end on time today.
Okay.
But Dr. Kemp, please share your question, and I'm going to.
Thanks, Rabbi. Could you interpret or at least discuss the fact that she offered her pitcher that she had drawn from the well to Eliezer, but that the implication could be that the camels would be aided by those camel drivers drawing the water from the well.
Right. She could have said, "I'm giving you water, and have your people feed the camels." No, she does it herself. So that indicates her kindness. Oh, you're saying in the beginning? Yeah, in the beginning, it sounds like she wasn't as kind. But the commentators say no, she may be more kind. But let's leave that alone for a second. Just bear with me for a minute. Let's assume it's a change. Let's assume we agree it's a change. Okay, let's continue. That's one more change, and then we'll have to stop it today. I'm going to point out one more change, and I'll make my points. Then you have a whole week to tell me if you agree with the thesis or not. Next change. Go back to verse 22. What happens at 22 is that as soon as she finishes giving the camels to drink, what does he do? He starts giving her jewelry. Jewelry is like betrothal, like giving the ring to the girl. He doesn't say, who are you? Okay, so that's verse 22. Now it came about when the camels had finished drinking, that the man took a golden nose ring, weighing 0.5 shekel, and 2 bracelets for her hands, weighing 10 gold shekels. And he said, whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there a place for us to lodging in your father's house? She says, and she said to him, I am the daughter of Betuel, son of Milcah, who was born to Nachor. Everyone knows who Nachor is. Nachor is Abraham's brother. Was Eliezer doing the right thing? No. I mean, he was acting on faith. You don't give a strange girl jewelry. You just don't do it. You find out she's your relative. Oh, she's probably the one. You give her the jewelry. And how do I know it's a strange thing to do? Because when Eliezer self-reports to what happened to the family, he lies, he changes. He says, first I asked her who your family is. Then when I heard it, then I gave you jewelry. You understand? He did not tell the family the real truth. So you see here, it looks like he's being innocent. He looks like he's repeating the story. He's making significant changes. So let me just show you that, and then I'll make my point. Look at verse 47. Over here, it's page 117. He says, then, and I asked her, and I said, whose daughter are you? And she replied, the daughter of Betuel, son of Nachor, whom Milcah bore to him. And I placed the nose ring on her nose and the bracelets on her hands. Is this true? Absolute fabrication, right? It seems like it's the same story, but he's making significant changes, and subtle changes, but significant, because he knows if I say I gave her the ring before I knew who she was, they would say, what? You're taking your chances? What's going on over here? So he changes that. There are more changes, but we only have 5 minutes left. So let me make my points. There are really 2 stories happening here. There's the story Eliezer is telling the family, and the story that actually happened. The story that Eliezer is telling the family is a story of an omen of superstition. The story that actually happened is a story of a test of character. But since her family, Laban, Betuel, are idol worshippers, he has to speak to the idol worshippers. Idol worshippers believe in superstition. He says superstition. What do I mean? Story he tells the family is, I made this sign, and whatever I said should happen, happened to the T. That's the story he told her. It wouldn't matter what. It's not, they weren't impressed that he was looking for kindness and she found kindness. They're not motivated by kindness. You'll see later, Lavan tricks the next generation. Lavan tricks his nephew, switches the girls who she's going to marry. This society is not motivated by kindness. So that we're all impressed. Wow, he was looking for kindness, he got kindness. That's not what they're impressed by. When they say, they say at the end of the story, must have came from God. Why? Because you made a sign and the sign happened to the T. That's superstition. And Eliezer is talking to them in that language because that's what they understand. And therefore it's possible, that's my addition, I think, it's possible that when Maimonides says, like Eliezer, the son of the servant of Abraham, he doesn't mean what Eliezer did. That you'll see in a minute is not superstition. What he did is what he told Lavan. The story he sold to Laban, Rebekah's brother, and Betuel, Rebekah's father, that was a story of superstition, and that's what influenced them. They said, it must be from God. You said it and it happened to the T. Now, in reality, there was not someone into superstition would not go for the story. If Laban made this deal, he would say, sorry, you made a plan. You said she's going to say, I will give water to you and to your camels. Rebekah did not do the exact same thing. Obviously, it's a bad sign because for the superstition to work, it has to be precise. Now, Eliezer says it could be, at least in his interpretation, it could be what she did is more respectful. That's my pitch. But even if you don't, so my pitch is she did better than the omen. Now, for someone who believes in superstition, better or worse is the same. It means it's not superstition. It didn't happen. The gods are not telling you to do this. So they would reject it. And Eliezer knows the psyche of Laban and Betuel, that when he tells them the story, he doesn't say, look how sensitive your daughter is. She doesn't put me with the camels. I'm an elderly guy. I got a long white beard. She's giving me honor. He doesn't say that. He says exactly what I said should happen. That's exactly what happened, even though that's not what happened. And that would be a problem. The problem is that Eliezer never did that. In fact, he made an omen, but it wasn't an omen. It was a sign to see character. Mm-hmm. she did not do exactly what he said. She improved on it. That's my view. Or even if she didn't improve, in an insignificant point, she changed, or less significant point, she changed. But Eliezer still goes ahead and says, this is the one I want because she's kind. So was Eliezer acting on an omen or not? Was Eliezer's thing a prohibition or not? Both Maimonides and the commentators who critique Maimonides are both right, because there's two stories. What Eliezer did was kosher. What Eliezer said to Laban to influence Laban and Bethuel, her brother and father, that was an omen that would be prohibited. That would be, I'm trying to impress you by this girl did exactly what I predicted she would do.
Right.
But what the content of what she did is irrelevant for the idol worshiper. And that's what Maimonides is critiquing. So now everybody's good. Maimonides is right that what Eliezer said he did was wrong. The commentators are right. What Eliezer would never, Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, would never do a violation like this, which Maimonides says that superstition is related to idol worship. Eliezer wouldn't do this. So they're right that Eliezer didn't do it in the sense that what he said he did and what he did were two different stories. In reality, it was a test of character. And she did not fulfill, this would not pass a test of superstition. If you went to a superstition expert, they would say, stay away from the shidduch. It's a terrible shidduch. She didn't do what you said she would do. The sign had failed. And that's why when he goes to the family, he says, oh, she did to the T. That's the story in short. That's the thesis. You have a whole week to tell me if you disagree, a whole week minus 1 hour, because next week at 9:30, they'll tell me if you agree or disagree. I hope everybody has a wonderful week. Unfortunately, I have to run to take my son to school and his friend because they woke up late and they have school on Sunday. They went to sleep late. So the merit of studying Torah is very important. So I'm going to try to get them to school now. But because not only the adults have to study Torah, the kids also do. So I'm going to jump, but have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for joining and listening. I apologize if you had to strain to understand what I'm trying to say with my voice, but thank you for being patient and joining us. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Bye.
Be better.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Be
Thank
well.
you, Rabbi. Have a good week.
Thank you. You too.